Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 8 of Roundup. Round 2. That's a joke for Luther and I. But we're back. I guess, standard sort of intro. Don't really have anything too special. Sort of going to be recapping everything that's going on, picking up where we left off from last episode. But as always, big thanks to Snowball and Blue Microphones for making this show happen, make it easy for us to produce and get all that delicious Oceanic Counter-Strike content into your ears and in front of your eyes. A quick side note as well, you might have seen Snowball through all the socials and whatnot. We've got Taffy on board with all the Counter-Strike content. He's not here for this episode, but we're definitely going to be integrating him into future episodes, and he's already been absolutely pumping out the written content, interviews and whatnot on the site. So it's been really exciting working with him so far, and I'm looking forward to getting him on the show and hearing what he has to say and whatnot. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's new.
And definitely be sure as well, if you haven't already, to, after this podcast, definitely swing by the Snowball Esports site, snowballesports.com, and go check out some of the written content, because there's been so much Counter-Strike content going up there in the last few weeks that it's just been absolutely insane. The level of coverage going up of OCCS. I'm just loving the quality and quantity of it, just steadily increasing. Love to see it, really.
Exactly. Something we love to see is, Australian teams and players internationally. How's that for a segue? Let's jump into IEM Cologne.
Yep.
We're just about getting into the playoffs at the time of recording. So we're looking back on the event now. We saw Renegades there, we saw Mouse Sports there, and we saw Complexity. And we'll talk about them in that order because I think they've all had very different stories. But I really want to start with Renegades because this is what we wanted last time. This is what we really were hoping to see in terms of performance in Katowice and the last season of Pro League. Of course, we know Pro League's coming up, but looking at Cologne in isolation, they had an amazing performance, quite an impressive run in terms of teams they were able to both beat and take maps off, namely Na'Vi is what I'm hinting at there. Yep. And we saw them jump up. I think it was 28 spots on the HLTV rankings, probably close to where Renegades should have been this whole time. It's just not playing internationally has hurt them. But they've just had an amazing run going all the way through the play-in. We saw that amazing series against OG. Who else they beat in the play-in? They lost the opening to Vitality and then took over against MIBR. And then we got into the actual main event where, unfortunately, they were put in, a bracket that involved Na'Vi. They ended up having to play Furia, who knocked them out. But overall, before we even get into some of the maps and some of the players, I'm super, super happy for the boys, super impressed with the run they had in Cologne.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, to put that HLTV ranking in perspective as well, that's the first time that the boys have been able to get back into the top 20 or 20 to 30 range since I think they dropped out of it by the looks of it around, it was April last year.
Since the pandemic started, basically.
Exactly. And they were only at last time they were around 22 or better was in February of last year. So, well over a year ago, right, where they were able to play at that point. You can obviously see that has certainly affected their ranking, but it's really good, as you said, seeing them jump back up. That whole 28 slot jump just being an absolute... Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is as well is that aside from just rankings and aside from just, that whole numeric value of the stats and stuff that gets fed into the HLTV algorithm, I think the mark that the Renegades players left in terms of both how Oceania and our local scene can go as far as pushing international teams and also being able to, take that and get close results, deliver some highlights, just doing a really good job. They have absolutely proved themselves in Cologne over the past few weeks. Being able to, I think if there's a series where you want to start looking at it where they just absolutely tore shit up and just like was so good to watch. That match against OG was just phenomenal.
100%. I think it's a testament to, Dexter was meant to be our one big IGL, our biggest
Yeah.
IGL export. But I think Inns is showing that he at least has chops, and that the team overall understand, the advantages they have being a team coming from a more isolated region, because going head to head with an IGL like Alexi B, and we know OG have their problems, but that series, you watch it, and that nuke game in particular, they just took control. Inns clearly, on the ball with some of these calls, just sort of read them like a book. And we'll get into the discussion about the addition of Kingfisher, but I imagine there's been, lots of help going on there. And, they sort of really just caught OG off guard. There's really nothing they could have done, particularly with Alistair popping off at this event, which I think we got to discuss him on the AWP. Sicko going back to more of that rifling, and that amazing like flick he did. Dude, did you see when he lit up? Sicko still got it, but in terms of what Alistair offers as a peak, as a ceiling, when he pops off like he did, we can see Renegades taking maps off, God mode simple. I think they've really sort of, they've got an extra gear, it looks like.
I mean, even if you're unable to make it through the group stage, taking a map off the HLTV number 2 ranked team in the world, that being Na'Vi, who now is seeded for the semifinals of this $1 million international LAN, first international LAN in 16 months, which, in itself is huge. And we'll talk about that in a sec. But the fact that on LAN, they were able to do that and knock out OG and make it that far all the way to the main tournament and put up these stellar performances, it's insane. It's really, really cool to see, because it has been a while since we've seen that kind of stellar performance from an Oceanic squad. Looking at how the Extreme project is going, for instance, where that was where the previous generation of our top OC talent kind of was in, right? Where all the people that you typically associate with Oceania and doing really well internationally, all on that roster, all over that way, with the exception of JKS now. And then seeing that they, that kind of happen is, I don't think there's people are particularly happy about Extreme's results and all that, and they weren't in this tournament. But then also seeing that despite that, a new squad of freshly formed faces coming from the local scene who mostly reside in Australia and are able to go internationally and then get results like this. It's so good, because it shows that we've got a new supply of fresh talent coming through, that we are able to develop that we are able to push players forward that can just show themselves to be really strong contenders. And I think now we're starting to see Renegades really start to settle back into that position where, they've properly now readjusted to having Inns as the IGL, which is something we only recently learned that he was doing, because they kept it hush for a while. And now we know, the cat's out of the bag, that Inns has been leading the squad, and he's been doing it really well as well. And even if they don't have Dexter, he can still lead them to some really excellent results, which is what we're seeing here.
Yeah, of course. Nicely timed to bring up Dexter, because we'll jump into the two teams we still claim as partially Oceanic, I guess. And we'll start with Mouse. So since Dexter's been there, they've hit some troughs, they've hit some heights. They're sort of coming off one of the heights with the Flashpoint 3 victory. They won an event, which is, it's nice when you open up Dexter's HLTV and there's a little trophy there now. So
love to see it.
Everyone had their eyes on Mouse Sports going into this, and they're quite a young lineup, and they've not played on LAN together, these players at all, really, in a very, very long time. So expectations were kind of a bit in the middle, I guess. I don't think anyone expected them to perform as well as they did, because everyone was popping off at Flashpoint. Rops, Frozen, Dexter, everyone was having a really good performance. So,
absolutely,
considering that, we still expected Mouse to, get through the play-ins, which they did. Admittedly, they had a rough series against Nip, but managed to squeeze it out against Evil Geniuses there and get into the main event. But I
Yeah.
think in terms of looking at this is a difficult sort of thing to explain, but like if you want to do perceived power level of teams, I think you'll agree when I say, Gambit, Nip, Liquid, you would probably rate a little higher than Renegades, Furia, and Vitality, sort of like, within that. So for Mouse Sports to end up in the group, again, their opening matchup was against Gambit. They dropped down and they had to play the loser of Nip, Liquid. And Liquid have their own problems, but we already know they lost to Nip in the play-in. So Mouse definitely had their work cut out for them, and we saw them leave the event quite early as a result. They didn't actually win a series. They got 2 maps. They won 2 maps at least, and they really didn't go down without a fight against Liquid. That Inferno game going to 4 overtimes.
Yeah, that's nuts.
But I think this was just kind of rough for Mouse Sports, but coming back down to a more realistic sort of display of what they're capable of.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that it's pretty easy to say that. I mean, look, I was definitely hoping that they would push a little bit further, especially coming off the back of that Flashpoint win, where they won that. I would say fairly dominantly. I mean, the 4 games that they had to get themselves to the final were all 2-0s against Fnatic.
I think they only lost 1 map against Nip, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I was hoping at the very least that off that maybe they'd be able to take a map against Nip in their series in the play-in, but unfortunately that didn't happen. They did make it through regardless, but getting seeded up against Gambit and then straight into Liquid, yeah, I think we've talked about it, but before, Ash, how that group that they got put into pretty well was a group of death, where it is so, like, there are some really strong contenders there. But even still, I would have loved to see if Mouse Sports could have pushed a little bit further there. I would have loved to have seen that. But again, it kind of makes a bit of sense if you think about it, because of the fact that we're comparing those online results in terms of Flashpoint.
Return to LAN.
Exactly. The whole aspect of the return to LAN absolutely has had an impact on players overall. There's no doubt about it, because even players who have been very experienced in playing in LAN environments haven't played in those environments in the last 16 months. And when they did play in those environments, they were still LAN environments, but they still probably, I would say, weren't the same environment, because Cologne has been so tightly restricted because of the COVID guidelines and what they're doing, which, I mean, power to them. They're doing a really good job in getting LANs back at all. But I'm sure it's a new and unfamiliar feeling for these players,
100%.
having to, and then also just getting back to LAN at all and getting back into that environment when they've been comfortably playing, from their team houses, or, a lot of these teams just playing all from their bedrooms with a webcam set up, and, that's all you got to do. But now going to Cologne, going to all this, it's definitely a shift to go back to LAN. But God, it's really good that we're going back to LAN, because the quality of play of this tournament overall has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can say that about pretty much all the teams there, are just showing up and just, really putting in the work, and it shows.
I think if we're gonna do like a good, a bad, and the ugly, we've done the good and the bad. Not that Mouse are bad, but this is just for example's sake. The ugly is complexity, unfortunately, in the sense that I think what this team at its inception was meant to be, in terms of the juggernaut and this amazing vision. I'm just disappointed, because I really was hoping, the return to LAN, we've got such pedigree on this team, particularly with JKS, and that's why we talk about this team, because he's there. I think Complexity have had a really sort of rough time on the online era, and something that kept coming up was, when we get back to LAN, things might work out a little better, and it's still the first one. And there's a lot of context here that I'll have to go through, because they got through the play-in. All 3 of the Aussie teams got through the play-in. Complexity took the series over Vici. They beat LDLC. They lost to FaZe, who FaZe are looking phenomenal at this event thus far. So
Yeah, for sure.
can't really put too many strikes on them there. But then we got to the main group, and again, they lost to G2, who going into the event I would have said, nah, but now that I have the information of what's happened, G2 are on fire, so I don't expect Complexity to be able to stand up to that. But they eventually just got sent home by Virtus Pro, and I think the super important thing for me was, having watched those games back, it's Complexity are just not able to. I don't know what's going on in terms of the roles and how comfortable they all are, but they lost a lot of leads. They were ahead, they would lose them. VP kept getting back into the game, kept clawing these little, every single inch Complexity gave up. VP took a mile, and it just sort of. Again, I come in with these expectations of what this roster on paper and what is said is meant to be, and it leaves some questions about do we see roster changes logistically with contracts and whatnot, maybe not, and going forward, what's going to happen with this lineup, because I don't know if they're happy with these kinds of results.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, on paper, as you said, all 5 pieces of this puzzle should work out. It's on paper, looking at it from a theory perspective, right? These players should absolutely, they should work together. It should be a pretty good team. There should be a lot of potential here. I still think there is a lot of potential with this 5, and I wouldn't go as quick to say that just going for immediate roster changes or anything like that is a great idea. We'll get into talking about that in a second, but just overall, I think that they definitely should be pushing a little bit higher. I feel like, especially at an event like this, I think finishing in the same place as a team like Renegades, who have the 5 Oceanic players who have been far removed from the rest of the international scene. I think when you're a team like Complexity, who has been in Europe this whole time, that's a bit worrying, that you're kind of in that same kind of standpoint for this first LAN event. Now, bear in mind, obviously,
all this context, right?
Yeah, return to LAN absolutely going to impact everything that happens, and there's no doubt that it's going to be a bit difficult to be able to get those top finishes when everyone is still adjusting, and some teams will obviously adjust better than others, right? And that has been what we've seen here. But even still, the most significant result that they've had in a while has been finishing like 7th to 8th at IEM Summer, 5th to 6th at Blast Premier, and winning a Sweet Spring or a Spring Sweet Spring, which doesn't have those top level teams, so obviously they should win that event. But I don't know, it's just a bit of a weird position where they're at the moment, where it feels like, again, it should work, and sometimes it does kind of work and you get those kind of mid-range results. But when you can contrast that to what Jason Lake was talking about when this team came together, about building a juggernaut and going really hard at it, when you look at the facilities that Complexity offer, what tools they have at their disposal as an organization, I feel like they could be punching a bit above this, that we could be seeing a bit more, and we're not.
Something we'll keep an eye on too. Their coach left them. Is it Kita? So I'm not sure if I said that right, but something that'll be really interesting. We'll see who they bring on board, because I know that there's a lot of coaches floating around at the moment, and I think there's a good opportunity to bring someone on who can maybe work with them in a different way. Maybe that's what they need. So I guess that's a little bit of a watch this space. And overall, I'd say that's a pretty good wrap for IEM. The playoff brackets, just in general, sort of as a Counter-Strike lover, if you haven't watched this event, definitely be going back and watching it. It's been amazing. Just go back, watch the Renegades games. Go back and, it's heartbreaking, but go watch the Mouse games. And just sort of enjoy it now that it's back, because it's been so long, and hopefully there's more around the corner. Hopefully IEM Melbourne happens soon. But
Real quick as well.
little call to action, right?
Yeah, real quick as well before we completely move past. Just on that complexity note, what do you think about roster changes? About how they'll go in regards to maybe their RMR points, how they go in terms of what do you think stopping them from?
Well, I know we've had discussions sort of, off the
Yeah,
cast about this. And I think, there's an ideal world where you can make some changes. And then there's a little more realistic in terms of, well, they've just bought JKS and it probably cost a lot. So, other teams might not be willing to spend the amount of money for him at the moment. So
yeah,
I think that they're in a tricky position. There's avenues. Do you change your Europa? Do you take out JKS? Do you take out Config, even though he looks like, is the IGL? So there's too many issues. And again, you brought up the RMR points. At this point, we're not early, but we're sort of early in the RMR cycle. And if they are
yeah.
going to make a change, they should do it now, cop the slight reduction, and then really gun for the rest of the RMR points. But they're really caught between a rock and a hard place, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I would probably say that I think look, again, as we've said, this should be, this team should work out on paper. I feel like you kind of introduce more instability if you go for a roster change now rather
Yeah.
than just trying to sort out those internal issues and trying to, make use of what you've already got, right?
At least be confident that what you've got doesn't work before
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And with the major only a few months away, praying that like it doesn't get pushed back, or I know that there have been some talks about the major potentially getting moved, following Sweden,
And TI
denying,
and stuff as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, with with the international having to move, and it looks like they're probably not going to budge for the major, so there's a possibility of a delay. But even still, I think post major will be probably the time where we see a lot of these international teams make the most roster moves we've seen in a while. If there's going to be a big roster shuffle, I feel around about that point would be the place to have it happen, given that, right at that point, there's fresh results, there's no RMR points to, really bother with. I mean, it all kind of like it would be a good time to do it. If Complexity are able to work out their issues before then and be able to get themselves back into that strong point, I think it would be worth keeping this 5. But yeah, there are many ways in which I feel like they probably could try and, if it gets to that point where it's still a few months from now, we're still seeing these very mixed results, I feel like there's a point where you have to make a change. And it does also beg the question, is Complexity the right place for JKS? Are there other teams that maybe would want to buy him out? Are there other teams that... But yeah, I think Complexity overall, I'm hoping to see some more, but yeah, we'll see. But as far as Cologne overall goes as well, I think just having a quick look as well, because why not? The first LAN in 16 months. We've got the single elimination playoff bracket starting up from midnight tonight of us recording, I believe, Ash.
Yeah, so this event will be wrapped up pretty quick in terms of when people are able to listen to this. So yeah, well, do you have any thoughts on what teams are looking good? It's it's a shame that none of these teams we're talking about have actually gotten to the playoffs.
I'm very keen to see how Gambit go in these playoffs, because they've been very well touted as more of an onliner squad and, all this for quite a while. And now, we're starting to see them get themselves back into some pretty strong form, right? Or rather continuing that form from online, where they've been one of the teams that have adapted better overall. They had a couple of shaky games to begin Cologne, I believe, but they've been doing really well. FaZe as well has been a team that certainly kicked themselves off quite a fair bit compared to their online results. But I'm really keen to see. I'm also really keen to see Na'Vi play through. I think I'm very much thinking that Na'Vi is in a really good position, especially being seeded into that semifinals. I think the fun thing about this is that any of these teams that has made it this far definitely has the potential to win this whole thing.
Oh, 100%. I think this is
no doubt in my mind.
This is an excellent, opportunity to remind everybody and encourage everybody actually to hop in the Snowball Discord, because we've been running, again, this is a Taffy initiative actually, but we've been running, HLTV fantasy groups and throughout the play-ins, the group stage, and now for the playoffs. For all these international events, it's great if anyone wants to join us. See if they've got what it takes to our big brain, the Roundup gang. Feel free to jump in the Discord and come play some of these fantasy games with us, because it's a lot of fun. We all get to sort of watch a lot of international CS. Some people like to go for the gamble. Put Dexter on your team. Go a whole team of Aussies and whatnot. So
Yeah,
I definitely agree that this playoff bracket is excellent, and again, everyone should be watching it. Everyone should be in the Snowball Discord, getting in on the fantasy. Good banter as well. There's nothing better than bragging rights.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that puts a lovely little bow on Cologne. So I reckon we do a hop, skip, and jump back to our side of the pond, and I'm going to use this opportunity to turn on my light. Look at that, amazing. Now we're back. We've got more exciting things to talk about, so we'll light it up, light the stage up for the ESEA Premier Wrap. I think it was season 37 finals that happened since we last recorded. I believe that's correct. So this was the one.
Yep.
This was the one where we saw Renegades win it, and this was the combined. So season 38 and 37 and 36 sort of worked together, because the winner of those two gets to go into a play-in for a EPL slot. And if Order were to have won this season, they would have automatically qualified. But we saw Renegades sort of cruise through and then make their way through the playoff bracket. I don't really think there's anything too interesting to bring up with Renegades, but there was one really super interesting storyline, and that is Vertex. This really super young, very hungry squad that we see. Hey, they've had their issues this year, to be honest. Not necessarily because of themselves, with roster things, ESEA bans affecting James, Tensai stepping away, but they've really managed to sort of rise from the flames and do something really impressive. This is one of the deepest, most impressive runs they've had so far. And in a world where Renegades, if this was season 36 where Renegades weren't here, they could have won it.
Yeah, straight up. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, as you said, with the Renegades run, that surprised no one. But seeing that finals, I think we all knew that Renegades would be in that finals. But I don't think anyone, or rather, I don't think that everyone was exactly expecting Vertex to be on the other side of them in that finals. The fact that they were able to make such a deep run against taking a 2-1 win against Order and a 2-1 against Direwolves to get to that point in the lower bracket, really, really insane, given the fact that the teams that were sent, that the results that sent those teams down there, they pretty much had to contend with. They had to play against Fury, who got knocked down by Order. They had to play against Order themselves, which they've been pegged as the number 2 team, and number 1 when Renegades isn't home for quite some time. I think even before the big roster move, which sent Vexite to Order and Alistair to Renegades, I think even before that point, you could pretty definitively say that's where the kind of OC rankings were, right? But now, I don't think this necessarily changes that, but I do think it definitely throws a little bit of questioning into the mix, where Vertex have been able to come up and completely surprise so many in being able to just make this run happen.
Yeah, I think something really interesting that I have to sort of comment on Vertex about is I don't see them as, this is going to sound odd, but I think you'll understand. They don't. Okay. No one is the best at anything, but Roffelko is a really, really good rifler, like really good. On a good day, he's really difficult. I think their AWP potential, with PZ and APOC, if they APOC dud, if they need to pull out a double AWP. I wouldn't say they're the best AWPers, especially when you go into, Alistair and whatnot. But it's just across the board, the way they play together. Brace is in-game leading. I've seen a lot of different in-game leaders praise him for, the way he does it. He's a dedicated, he's very true to the role in that sense. Yeah. But I think that the way that they pull, that they're greater than the sum of their parts is essentially what I'm trying to say. And this really showed it, because they've been hinting at it that they're really putting in all this work, and I wouldn't say they've fallen short. They've just hit where we expect them to up until now, and this was a breakout performance that you can liken to the end of last year when they made that surprise run at Beijing and actually qualified for the main event. Hopefully, I wouldn't say that was a one-hit wonder, because there was, again, a lot of circumstances either side of it. And I also hope that this isn't sort of a one-trick wonder with Vertex. I think if they can keep up this form in terms of putting all their parts together to be something greater, the next couple of events we're going to see them at, whether it's the next season of Premier or ANZ Champs, they're a contender. They're up there with Order to maybe stick it to Renegades.
Yeah, I mean, shit, man. I'm so keen to just see more from Vertex. They've been, I feel like they've been a really good squad to watch for quite some time, right? Where no matter what, they've always been able to put up an interesting fight. They've always been able to, but now, again, that they've been able to sort things out and get James back into the server, right? Which is something that, absolutely everyone was happy to see, right? Huge thing. And it really seems like they've gone back to, after a brief warm-up period, it seems like they've really geared themselves back into the point where they're kind of following along from where they were before the ESEA bans hit, where at the end of last year, as you kind of touched on, they were able to get that, get those results to try and qualify for Beijing. They were able to, really just show up against some of the top squads at the time in OCE. They're doing the same here for sure. And I'm very keen to see how they go in the next seasons of ESEA Premier and ANZ Champs and, whatever other events pop up in the meantime. I really want to see more from this Vertex squad because I think there is so much potential there that I don't even know that we're seeing them at their complete best yet. I think these boys are some of the most driven in the scene, absolutely, to continue improving and continue just, absolutely tearing shit up. It's great.
That's something I forgot because I didn't put it in my notes, but I was reading interviews with Malta and the team and Renegades, right, from Cologne, and they were asked questions about what it is like back here, and Vertex was like, he name dropped Vertex as a young, hungry sort of team, and I think that people have their eyes on this squad because they respect what it is. Having Train taken out of the map pool as well, this squad is willing to play every map. We might not see them be the best at every map, but they have a really nice deep map pool. And
absolutely,
I really would like to see their form sort of continue across the board. We'll sort of, build on that and now look at Order, who this sort of, while the Vertex story was like, wow, this is really cool. If you were an Order fan, you're sort of looking at this going like, the fuck? What's going on here? This is Order should have been in that final, it's always Renegades Order, it's always 1 and 2, and they didn't even finish third here. They finished fourth at the hands of Vertex, admittedly. But I don't know. Do you have any sort of general thoughts on this? Because you look at the lineup on paper and you see the performance from Vex side every time.
Yeah.
Do you think that this squad is this anything to be worried about if you're an Order Army fan?
Yeah, it's hard to weigh up, isn't it? Because at the same time, while you could say that in the actual ESEA Premier Finals run for Season 37, they fell short a bit, you could also just as easily argue that, and definitely I agree with this, they showed up quite significantly in that best-of-5 playoff for the
they knew they had a chance at regardless. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly.
No, that's important to bring up.
Exactly. They were able to take a map off Renegades who just 2-0'd OG internationally and were, just went on pretty well straight after this, got on flights, went to Cologne, and then showed up to pretty well represent Oceania as a region that can finally, deliver some of those strong players and finally deliver some strong teams that can compete on that international stage. And really just show up in really strong form, right? So I think the fact that they were able to get that 16-13 win on Vertigo, which was Renegade's pick in that series, was really insane. And yeah, I think you can always highlight Vexite in any of these games. I feel like Vexite absolutely. I think, to put it in the words of Sponge, he's one for the future from AUCS.
100%.
He's there's no doubt about it. Looking at just the pure stats of that map, he dropped 36 fucking kills against Renegades. Like,
he's freakishly good. I do like it.
Like, it's insane. He had a 1.77 rating in that game. He had so many things going for him, and when you were watching that, it was so good to watch. It was some amazing form. But then it also does lend the question of, is it just that his Order teammates are very much relying on that, and that, you know, if Declan doesn't have a good performance, will his team not have a good performance? I don't necessarily agree with that, but
Right.
I think that it is a valid question because, again, that has been somewhat a bit of the case where it's like he's continually been that top fragger that's always been able to get those entries, always been able to pretty much, you know, just close things out when needed, right?
To build on that, do you think there's any merit to the discussion of, you know, it isn't Vexite, of course, but the other pieces in Order that something that we've seen historically, you know, especially all throughout last year, Order playing second fiddle to Renegades, always. There hasn't really been a change that has really allowed them to eke ahead consistently. And, you know, losing Alistair to Renegades didn't help, but Order were able to replace their superstar, you know, fragger in Alistair with admittedly a non-AWPer, but, you know, another person who is able to do that. Do you think that while they have that role sorted, that there's a discussion around if there's something in terms of growth within the squad or another piece that maybe needs to change, whether role or roster wise? Because do you see a world where should Order's goal be we need to beat Renegades? Because if they don't, they're not going to get international opportunities.
I mean, you're not wrong in that point, in that if Order want to, you know, just because of the reality of it, that as a smaller region, we only really get that one slot for most international events, and it's really difficult to open up a second, and it's very rare that that is the case, right? I think that Order at the moment, I think here's the problem, right?
Mm.
If it's a role change, it can definitely shake up the dynamic of the team, which would absolutely, you know, introduce more instability and probably lead to more mixed results. Things would get worse before they get better.
Yeah.
Whether they choose to take that, you know, completely up to them, and it would be understandable if, you know, they were to try and shift things around. But teams are always a constant evolution in that sense, where teams constantly are playing around with different roles and, you know, trying to get themselves into that kind of spot of trying different strats, trying different things, looking through different demos, and just trying to create a better version of themselves. And the brute force way of doing that is a roster change, where you go, okay, we need to do something drastic. Let's just see what piece fits better here and there. The problem with Order is that no matter what you do in terms of that, where if you were to say any of these players could be replaced and someone else could be found, who would you pick? There's no one.
That's the problem. Yeah, that is like the big problem, because okay, hypothetically, you just take a Direwolves player. It doesn't even matter who, but you do a 1-for-1 swap. Sure, it's an upgrade, but Direwolves and Order haven't been able to beat Renegades, so you're probably still not going to be able to beat Renegades, maybe. And then you just make Direwolves, you know, they have the same problem. They've just had a change then, and then Order are going to beat them because they've in theory had an upgrade. So that's the conundrum, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I definitely think that lends itself to the squad probably looking for more time to grow. The only other thing I can think of is, and I'm not entirely knowledgeable on this, but coaching and you know, analytical roles behind the scenes at Order to maybe you know, help the team in that aspect, because that is a very sort of, you add it on and you get a bonus, not necessarily with a massive downside. But I don't really have any other solutions for order other than Vexite go kill.
I mean,
Not
I
that
think
that's a bad way to go about it.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, because when you give him that order, he will do it.
Exactly.
That's just the player Vexite is, right? He's not, and that's why he's been kind of the standout player, I think, of OCCS as of late, in terms of where all the highlights are coming from, in terms of where you can kind of, if you want to point to a pool of young talent OCE, that pool is made up of Vexite.
Yeah.
It's not a pool, it's a
No one
player.
else has gotten the international shout
No,
out from Mr. Chad himself. So
yeah, well, no one else has gotten themselves to that same level, I feel like, where, again, this, like, Vexite, incredibly strong player, where, being able to bounce around Chiefs in that order and then find himself in this absolutely strong role.
you'd have to go
But
back
I feel
to.
like,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. I feel like the one change that order could make that wouldn't exactly be changing up the flow too much, but would still allow some structural room, is to bring on a coach, because as it stands right now, by the looks of things, Order does not have a coach on board. They have other people in the organization doing management roles, like Gomez, for example, who is, managing players in Order in general, but not a coach focused specifically on Counter-Strike per se.
In terms of the role purely, he's not able to offer that to them.
Exactly. In terms of, like, Order as an organization probably they definitely provide a huge amount to their players in terms of resources. I feel like the resource that they could probably provide the most, that would be of most help, is by hiring a coach. Because I feel like being able to, take off some of those IGLing duties and offload them to a coach to be able to help the team through and be able to help them develop into something a bit stronger. That's the way you can do improvements and probably speed up that process without making drastic changes, because it doesn't disrupt the flow of what happens between the players in the server, because the coach is removed in that situation except for the timeouts.
No, I agree. I 100% agree. And I guess fingers crossed, because we'd hate to see Vexite sort of get stuck in a situation that Alistair was in, where it was, he's this exceptional player who just misses out on all the opportunities because Order can't, edge it out over Renegades. But not to dwell. I think, we'll look at what's left with Premier, in the sense that season 38 will now be the next season. And like with every season, some teams move up, some move down, and relegations helps us sort that out. So I think it's the bottom. Whoever finishes last just gets ejected, but usually there's a couple dead teams, so that just gets sorted anyway. But if I look at what we've got in terms of season 38 coming up, we've got 5 teams that have made it through from relegations and one that came directly from Open. I believe that's how it works. Coming from Open, we had Fury, but relegations have just wrapped up, and I think for the most part, I think, these are all teams who I'd expect to be able to make it through. It's a disappointing finish for 8 Ballers, who, they've been this team up on sort of grinding in a very traditional sense in terms of how you want to build a Counter-Strike team, but not traditional in any way, shape or form for what our region typically does.
Yeah.
And after seeing, their impressive run getting into ANZ champs, I had my eyes on them to make it to Premier, but unfortunately, season 38 won't be the season for them. Instead, ESEA got through after beating 8 Ballers and then getting the forfeit from Do Milk, who ended up qualifying anyway over Dynasty. And then ALK, which I'm trying to think what that team used to be, because it's the Bandit Oily team from ANZ champs. I forgot. Is it Overperformers is the name they played under in ANZ champs?
Pretty sure that's right.
And then, of course, Animal Squad and Lessay, who I know you've been seeing a lot of Lessay in LPL. And Animal Squad, they've just had a roster move, which we'll get to shortly. But, they're a team very synonymous with this region anyway. So overall, the rest of the teams are just the teams who finished high enough in the last season of Premier. And I'm excited. Premier has actually been really enjoyable after some format changes they made. And yeah, I don't know. Do you have any sort of thoughts on
Um,
relegations? I think that's really it. That's all there
I
is
mean,
to
I think
it
that
now.
I think that ties it up pretty nicely. As you said, it would have been really cool to see things go a bit further for eight ballers who,
Yeah.
I think that they're because they have achieved quite a lot, right? They for anyone who somehow hasn't heard much of eight ballers because you're only paying attention to the real top end of the scene, which is, fair enough. There's a lot of Oceanic CS to stay on top of in terms of the full range of it, and we don't go over everything necessarily in this show. We mostly focus towards the top end of things, but it's always fun to, check in with the mid tier of the scene and that sort of thing as well. And I think eight ballers have been one of the most fascinating teams because, yeah, as you said, they've been going about a very typical sense of how to build a CS scene in terms of underlying structure and underlying, all those things, but very atypical in the fact that they started doing that when they were in LPL Amateur,
Mm.
which is an open, it's basically LPL's equivalent of ESEA Open, where you just pay a monthly fee and you can just play.
Yeah.
And that's their second lowest div, the other one being Open, which LPL Open, which is free to play. But yeah, the cost being the only difference between those two. But yeah, so coming from that point, and now they're an LPL Challenger, which is 4 divisions ahead, but they did that in 6 months. The last 6 months, they've jumped ahead that far, and they've qualified for ANZ champs. And it looked like that, given that, I think it would have been a reasonable expectation to hope that they would be able to make it through to Premier, given the teams that are there already and their results against them. Unfortunately, going up against ESEA and Animal Squad, they fell a bit short with a 2-0 win going to Animal Squad. Although that first map on Nuke, 19-17 overtime, going, but still 2-0 for Animal Squad. It's a shame because I feel like, given how much effort has gone into this project and given how much these players have really poured themselves into it, that definitely has to be disappointing, having to play another season of Open to try and go for this again.
Yeah.
But that being said, I do see a future where we do see eight ballers in Premier. I definitely think that, given their results against some of the teams who have even qualified, such as Lesse, right, in LPL Challenger, that's entirely possible. That's entirely open to them. I'm very keen to see more from all of these teams because I feel like this is kind of the range where we see the most development and growth, but also a lot of instability at the same time in these rosters. I'm very keen to see the new talent that will come through in this next season. I'm very keen to see how this next season of Premier goes, and hopefully I'll be covering some of it as well. Quick plug, I got Premier Perm, so I'm going to be jumping onto the cast for some Premier games as well in this upcoming season. So twitch.tv/2sbs, make sure to, if you like the sound of my voice in a podcast, I can yell over some video games too,
Yeah. It should be good. It should be really exciting, especially, get you behind the mic on a couple of these games, right?
I'm keen.
Yeah,
I'm keen.
that should be really good. Let's transition into some roster moves, and you don't actually have a title for this, but I need to bring this up. This is a team move. BBBMBCBS is no more, and I'm devastated. I just thought I'd bring it up because they're just such a meme to me. But they've transitioned into the Warriors esports team. So, that's a bit sad. I tweeted it, and Mingovi replied saying that they're always going to be BBBMBCBS in heart, and that's all that matters to me. I think, in a way, I'm their biggest fan, but purely just on name value. I can't say I actually watch a lot of their games. Just I just don't happen to watch a lot. But yeah, I just thought we'd bring that up. We'll get into the actual moves. So we alluded earlier, Renegades bringing Kingfisher on as their coach, and again, I think we hit some of the points before, but just to rehash, what's important to me for this move is what it does, what I hope it does, in enabling ins to better transition into this in-game leader role, offer something that's difficult that I don't think Renegades get enough credit for. And they've already come back from Cologne, and they're all in 14-day quarantine now. Something they don't get enough credit for is how they have to be jumping between two regions that have two completely different metas. I know we're catching up, but going to Europe, playing in Europe is completely different to Australia, and It's just an extra set of eyes and hands and a brain to help, in the weeks leading up to going for Cologne, for example. Kingfisher can be working within sort of focusing on that while the team is just sort of focusing on the games they're actually playing. And vice versa, you know what I mean? So while this is what we said about order, you add a coach and it just takes so much stress off everyone and spreads the load. And
Exactly.
if you base some of these results they've had, of course, a lot of factors going into it with, role changes as well, but the way they've been able to reinvent themselves just for Cologne in isolation, I think already it's been impressive, and I'm excited for more of this.
Yeah, again, couldn't have said it better myself. I feel like it's really exciting to see how again, bringing on a coach certainly does a fair bit. It's been a while since we've seen, any kind of coaches working with this Renegade squad. It's been quite a long time, I believe, since Renegade / Greyhound, that core has had coaches working with them. I'm not exactly sure of how long, but the last I can remember was, I think,
They had Mitha. They had Mitha for a while,
yeah,
but
yeah, it was
obviously,
never.
that would have been different because he never came to Australia. He was
Yeah,
always in
exactly.
Denmark.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, is that having a coach to work with them in person, work with them in events, and be with them on their time zone, and pretty much a much more integral part, I would imagine, in terms of how they go about their prac from day to day. Yeah, that's going to be huge. I think that Kingfisher, we know based on, because he was on the ESEA roster for Renegades, I think even around the time we recorded the last episode. Um, so he, based off that, we know that he's been working with the boys for a bit of time now.
Hmm.
And it seems like, you know, in that space, that perhaps that is even part of the reason why we've been able to see such strong results in Cologne. Obvious speculation, but I think that absolutely would have contributed to that fact that they were able to push so far ahead. So yeah, I think that for any team really that has the means to, bringing a coach on is quite a good thing to do, because it gives you more room for your IGL. It gives you more opportunity to be able to reflect on, where your team's stance is, and, just have another perspective, really. And that's ultimately what this move is going to do for Renegades. And I'm very keen to see how it pans out with the future. Very excited for the future overall from these boys.
For sure. In terms of the other roster move, there's only one other one, but we have APOC returning, sort of. Returning's not necessarily the correct word, but he's coming into the Direwolves lineup over Soju. And the reason I say it's not the correct word is because at the end of their Avant, he didn't actually come into the team as Direwolves. He then left at the time to go play with Animal Squad. So
Yeah.
this team is starting to look more like the old Avant lineup now. I've got a couple loaded questions, I guess. I don't know if I really expected this. I don't know if I expected a move from Direwolves. They were sort of just hovering as a sort of third to fourth, second on a good day kind of team. But they never really, blew my socks off. I was never really kind of like, wow, Direwolves.
Hmm.
And with Soju leaving, I I'm not entirely, sure what I think of Direwolves at this point because I would never really decided what I thought overall anyway. They're kind of in that weird zone for me as they have really good maps. I think they play really good T sides. They've got really good a Dust 2, for example, just always comes to mind for me. But
Yeah.
I don't really know, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Well, the first thing is that I don't know why it was Soju, but
Mm,
that went, because I don't really think that he was the problem in terms of what needed to be changed. But
yeah.
well, given the timing of the announcements, given that he kind of stepped out, and then about a week later they announced that, not to speculate too hard or anything, but there could have been other reasons, like, behind the scenes, maybe Soju just wanted to leave, maybe,
Yeah.
it was more that kind of thing, right? Rather than it being it not being a direct replacement based on performance, but based on what the players wanted and what Soju wanted to do. And well, and that is the fact as well that, the last team that Soju was a part of was Vertex. And he was not there as a player for a good amount of time. He shifted to a coach analyst role, and then James got banned, and so he had to, not really by choice, but because they didn't have any other move to make really at that point, he had to jump back in as a player. And then it was a bit after that where James came back that he ended up leaving, I believe. That
Yeah,
off the top of my head, that's sort of the time.
From what I understand, he was meant to stick with Vertex.
Yeah.
And this was sort of goes back to, Vertex had all these problems going on with their roster because Soju got the offer to go play with Direwolves, and obviously he took it. So I agree. I don't necessarily, not to say that there is a problem with Direwolves, but if I look at Vertex as a team that is greater than the sum of their parts, Direwolves are just 5 parts that are, that put together, and nothing really sort of stands out to me, outside of just good performances, good sort of solid halves and maps here and there. So unless they are just, sticking to the whole, we're going to keep making changes, very OCE way of doing things.
Yeah.
APOC, again, neither of these players are terrible players, nothing like that. APOC is super veteran status. He's been all around. And I'm sure if Soju wants to, we'll end up on another team. I can't necessarily say it'll be a top team, a bottom team, or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot more question marks than answers for me with this move.
Yeah, I mean, what I was getting at by bringing up Vertex as well was that I think that it could be very possible as well that if we do see his return to a team soon, that it could actually be in that coaching role.
Yes.
There are definitely a lot of teams in that top area where they're probably not wanting to make big roster moves, but they don't have a coach, and
that would be really cool to see if that happened.
Yeah, and it would make sense for Soju because, again, he's been having quite a fair bit of experience in both senses. I think he would do well in a coach spot. He did while he was doing that for the Vertex lineup, and I feel like it'd be really interesting to see him go back to that. Really depends on where he's feeling, whether he'd be open for opportunities as a player, or whether he's more open to opportunities as coach. He pretty much just said, in his parting tweet that he's still looking to compete. Hit him up by Twitter DM,
the classic.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully we'll see him back in the server soon in some form. I'm really keen to, because I think he's a player that definitely is worth paying attention to. But I also think this APOC move as bringing him back in, I think it'll be really interesting to see how it pans out, because I don't see it necessarily as a downgrade or an upgrade. I feel it's just kind of a shift around, which will probably affect the momentum and all that of the Direwolves squad. But if they're able to get themselves reacclimated to that, these players have already, for the most part, played with APOC before, and they've been in that kind of. So I think in that case, it's really hard to chalk up how this move will go for Direwolves, but I don't really think it'll be the massive shift that, a move like this on, say, another team would be.
Yeah.
I feel like Direwolves are kind of just in that unique spot, whereas like that probably won't be, affect the status quo too much.
Oh, cool. We're coming up to the end, so I think now we'll sort of look at what's in the pipeline, what's coming up in future events and whatnot, and I think EPL is one that comes to mind immediately because Renegades should be there. Well, they will be there hopefully. But what's interesting is instead of last time when they were in Katowice and played EPL immediately after, they have come home. We already know that they've come home. So it sort of raises some questions about maybe it's likely that we'll see them in a particular group, because if you remember, the EPL format is sometimes is it 4 groups? I think there's 4 groups, and they sort of space them out over a couple of weeks. So the event is supposed to start in about a month from now, middle of August, but the groups go on for so long that Renegades might not even need to play until September if they're in that final group. So This is why I sort of brought up earlier that I think Renegades do not get enough credit for how much and it's their choice that they do want to sort of head overseas, come back, but to be able to sort of do that around, COVID shenanigans with quarantine and how frustrating
Yeah.
that process must be. I think that's really interesting, and I hope it doesn't affect them in any negative way because they put the results on, but yeah, that's going to happen. The EPL, honestly, in terms of the teams, it looks like a very, very similar sort of lineup to last time. You've got all the partner teams will be there, some ESL World Ranking teams. So depending on how Cologne shapes up, we'll see that, and hopefully Renegades can put some good results on the board. Much better than they did last time, at least, because I think they only won one map against Big to avoid finishing last in their group. Big also won one, but because they lost the head-to-head to Renegades, it was a disappointing way to leave Pro League last time. But I think this time it's they'll go in all guns blazing. Any thoughts on Pro League?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see. There hasn't exactly, by the looks of it, really been word on whether or not this will be another return to LAN. By the looks of it, they're saying yes, it's all in Malta and all that, but they haven't committed to it being at LAN as of yet, at least from what's been publicly communicated about this event.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be, to be honest, I think it's going to be a real shame if they don't manage to get this one back on LAN after Cologne, because they've kind of just set the precedent for what really good CS looks like, and that is always going to be on LAN. Counter-Strike is a LAN game, full stop. That is where the best of the best of this game is played. That's where it comes out, and if ESL aren't able to pull that off again, it's and if the shift to online just goes back after Cologne's all done and dusted, it's going to be a real disappointment in that sense. As far as results go, either way, I feel like Renegades, now with a coach on board and now with a bit more precedent coming off of Cologne, certainly will have a fair bit of confidence going into this, I feel like, because, even though no one's exactly expecting Renegades to just, win the thing or, stuff like that, but they certainly will take, I think, my prediction is that they'll definitely take some good results. I feel like they're in a point where, at the very least, it all depends on seeding and all depends on how that goes. But I feel like they're in such a good position right now where they're looking like they're playing some of the best CS I've ever seen them play, man. It's really great.
There's scalps they can take, especially with teams like, if you look at the partner teams, we've already spoken about Complexity, Evil Geniuses, Fnatic are in bad form. There's potential here for some banger, opportunity. I'd love to see him make playoffs. That would be beautiful.
Praying, please. Let it happen. Just let it happen. It'd be so good. But look, I feel like if they're able to continue that form that we saw at Cologne, who knows what could happen. They're looking really good right now, and I'm really keen to see how it goes. That being said, I don't know how, it's also, you touched on it, it's also wild how they're going through this whole, quarantining process.
I couldn't do it, man.
Forward in this environment. I understand that's what they want to do because they want to, for the most part, just stick around Australia, but it does make me wonder why they don't, maybe consider that a possibility of heading to Europe. But I mean, I'm sure they could get it done, right? But regardless, in
the words of Kanye West, I guess we'll never know.
It does make me wonder how they would go if they were, instead of scrimming, Vexite and his crew every now and then, and all the other teams here, if they were scrimming European teams.
It'd be a different world.
Yeah, it does make me wonder, but as you said, we'll never know unless it happens. But I'm very keen for this event, and also very keen to see how Complexity and Mouse go. Looking at the other side of Oceanic stuff, where we're looking at our Aussies abroad.
It's a very similar pool to Cologne in that sense, right? It's
Yeah, exactly. It's very much most of the teams that are in this event, at least that we found out about so far, were at Cologne. And it's a very similar kind of thing. So they'll be playing up against similar opponents. I feel like Mouse Sports still has a lot of room to grow, and I feel the same about Complexity. I feel like both of these teams, there's still a lot there where they can kind of strike back a bit further. But if I have to say, out of either of these two teams, Mouse and Complexity, who will make the deeper run in the tournament, I feel like just looking by past results and past statistics, that I probably would expect a bit more out of Mouse, and I'm hoping that maybe Complexity can try and change that outlook of things. Because as we touched on before, yeah, they haven't really been performing to the standard we'd hoped.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is an event where if they are going to change that before the major, it's certainly a good opportunity to.
Of course. We'll sort of cap it all off with the LPL Season 2 playoffs. Upon reflection, we should have put this a bit higher up in the show, because when we originally planned, this would have been a future event. So I apologize for that. But we won't skip it out or anything like that. But we'll just do a sort of quick thoughts on LPL. This one's always really interesting because we don't have Renegades or Order here, so I think the pool is a lot more open for these teams like Direwolves, Chiefs, Paradox, just on the eye test here, Rooster, to show us what they're made of without the worry of like Vexite or Alistair just dumping on them. But at this point, we're through to stage 2 after what's been a month and a half of games, and we've the upper bracket has already sort of the round 1 has finished, and Direwolves absolutely destroyed Animal Squad. Animal Squad only getting 10 rounds, and again, this is directly after. This was basically APOC's first game on the squad after leaving Animal Squad, so it helps versus your other team like that. We saw Paradox beat Fury, so they're going to play each other now. That's Direwolves and Paradox. And then on the other bottom half,
with that one.
3
to Paradox for that opener map.
Yeah. And then on the other side, we've got Rooster, who played on Liquipedia, it's X-Bizarre Gaming. And they'll move forward to play Chiefs, who beat Warriors, formerly BBB MBCBS. So that means all the teams that I just said who lost are now in the lower bracket, and that'll eventually play out. 4 teams will go through into the third stage. Do you have any sort of thoughts? This is sort of the first proving ground for Chiefs, because they've made lots of changes with I know Maker came into the squad. I know Blitz is back in action. Motion is Motion's been associated with the squad for a while now, but this is sort of the first time I can think of recently where we're getting to see Chiefs really maybe get to play some proper games in an event like this. And then, just real quickly, Paradox, I've got my eye on, and of course we'll see what Direwolves can do. But what do you think with these the 4 teams that probably you got going through?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first thing is that with that first round in stage 2, none of those results were unexpected. That's exactly how it should go on paper. There's no sort of upsets, anything like that. Direwolves smacking Animal Squad down after taking one of their players and them having to use a substitute. That's the unfortunate. That's an unfortunate
example. Perfect example of why Order shouldn't pick up like a player from another team. That's what'll happen. But
Fury versus Paradox expected. Rooster beating X-Bizarre. And Chiefs for beating Warriors, formerly known as BBB MBCBS.
My man.
That's all expected. As you said, as you touched on, I think it's going to be really good to see more Chiefs, because as of late, we haven't really been seeing too much of Chiefs, I feel like. Not as much as we would have hoped. They weren't really in that finals bracket for Premier. They weren't, and I really want to see more from this Chiefs lineup, because there are some really sharp players there. I feel like the motion pickup was actually a really good move for them. And assuming that it continues to work out, and with the last line of roster moves as well, bringing Maker on, and the 5 they've got at the moment, I think if they're able to just find themselves a consistent 5, then it's going to be really good. The problem is that they just haven't done that for quite a while. Is that Chiefs every season has seemingly had a bit of a roster shuffle. They need to slow down, settle down, get themselves a solid 5 that they can work with, I feel like.
It's weird considering the name value, the pedigree, just like the eye test of looking at the name Chiefs. it feels weird that they're almost not in the discussion anymore for top 5. If I'm honest, they're not in mine. They're just below it, but
Yeah,
it just feels weird.
I feel like that is, yeah, no, I definitely don't disagree. I feel like they definitely do have the opportunity to try and claim it back, depending on how results in the next season go.
100%.
I feel like their current 5 on paper looks very strong, and I gotta root for Humongous Emotion as well, the Brisbane boys, because Brisbane player supremacy as always. The true capital of Australian.
It's true.
No.
It's true. No, I'm pretty sure JKS is a Brisbane boy, so hopefully, I might have just made that up.
yeah, but yeah, look, I'm really hoping to see more from them. Rooster as well. This kind of weird mix where, because we don't see them play in ANZ Champs and we don't see them play in Premier, and there's some really strong talent on that lineup. They're always a really fun team to watch. I love seeing like ASAP, for example, who's a really strong player, and I really want to see more from him as well. I really want to see more from Chelios, from Danny G. These players that are really, really strong, but we just don't see as much of Rooster, and we haven't been seeing as much as of Chiefs. So in a way, it's kind of fitting that now they're having to play each other next week. Direwolves versus Paradox should be a very interesting game, because I can very much sort of weigh these two teams up very closely. I would say on paper, probably Direwolves should take that one, but now that they've just had this roster move, that definitely does add a bit of instability and a bit of uncertainty, if you will. And then in the lower bracket side, Animal Squad versus Fury. As much as it'd be cool to see Fury pull off the upset there, I don't see that happening. I think Animal Squad should be able to close that one out, but again, because they've just had a player stripped away, if there's an opportunity for Fury to show up, well, now is definitely the time. And X-Bazaar versus Warriors,
who knows?
Kind of hard to predict. Yeah, that one's kind of a toss-up, I feel like. But that's where this next week of matches for LPL Pro are. I feel like out of the teams left there's 4 that will continue to the next stage. I feel like it'll be probably Direwolves and Paradox will go through.
Yeah.
One of them will have to go through the lower bracket, and Rooster or Chiefs, depends on that result and depends on how they go. But yeah, it depends on who they get seated up against the lower bracket, I suppose. Whoever loses that matchup.
While the bracket looks like it's just going to play out, the 4 better teams are going to beat the 4 bottom teams, I still think it's better than, any 4 of those can win. This is just rehashing what I started with. It's nice to have an event where we get to sort of see how these teams interplay without order and Vertex or Renegades. So yeah, interesting. That's keep an eye out for LPL. I guess we'll be recapping that next time we record, sort of with the results.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be very interesting to see how these games go, because again, these are all teams that we don't see as much of in the other leagues, and I'm very keen for it.
Cool. Well, that brings us to sort of the closing bit of Roundup episode 8. Been good. Really been a lot of good CS on at the moment. Lots of really interesting sort of things going on. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of instability in terms of other times when there's 40 players who just can't play, or 7,000 roster moves. So I think Aussie CS is in a really good sort of spot right now in terms of watching, being a part of some storylines. But of course, if you want to keep up with all these storylines, Snowball Esports, you should look no further than to have a read, get on the website, read some of the amazing content Taffy puts out there. I really love the way he sort of builds the stories of what's going on, and with his fantastic sort of knowledge, his historical background with the region. Banger stuff. If you're not into the reading, of course, that's what this podcast is for, people who like to listen.
Yep.
And if you're not into looking at either of us, which, whatever, you're lost, guys. You can listen to audio-only versions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Pocket Casts.
Yep.
Otherwise, definitely, again, get in that Discord. I really want to see everyone with their fantasy teams. I really want to, get get Counter-Strike really popping in there. We've got to show all those League of Legends fools and those Valorant fools that Counter-Strike is the game.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
otherwise, I'll pass it off to you to sort of walk this one out and
Yeah, sure. Yeah, pretty much everything Ash said. Definitely check out the website and stuff, and make sure that if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that bell as well. As all the
smash that like button,
smash that like. As all the cool YouTubers say. There hopefully should be more video content in general coming out, more of this podcast, obviously. So if you're listening along, be sure to check out the YouTube as well. Yeah, check out the Discord. We're really active in that Discord, and we love talking about Counter-Strike with as many people as possible, because I think that there's a lot of discussion to be had around where the OC scene is at the moment and where the international scene is at the moment. Things are looking really good and on the up and up for Counter-Strike watchers and OC at the moment. So yeah, very keen for that. So come join the Discord if you haven't already. And otherwise, make sure to follow us on Twitter as well, at It's2SBS for me, at Shalibo for Ash. And thanks once again to Snowball and Blue Microphones for helping make this all possible. Really excited to get back further back into the podcast and keep this as a regular thing. We've got Taffy on board now as well, who's helping put this together, and hopefully we'll also get him on the podcast as another co-host for some episodes coming up soon. But in the meantime, guys, thank you so much for listening. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much.
Awesome.